Hello, I'm James Brett from Civica and really delighted to be here to introduce today's keynote speakers sponsored by Civica. You've just seen some of the work we do across Singapore. That's been a really wonderful experience for us, as well as providing a library management system. We're also running some of the libraries with our staff, and that has really helped drive improvements and innovation within Civica. We're also very privileged to work with libraries across Australia and New Zealand. I just want to share one of our goals, which is facilitating educational transformation and improving efficiencies and helping you do more of what you want to do. And it's something that I'm very passionate about, is how can we each make more of a difference in the world. And me personally, and from Civica, we're very grateful for the impact you have in your communities with the services you provide. As part of our support to you, we've recently released our second Changing Landscapes research report. Here we are. Developed in partnership with the UTS, University of Technology, Sydney. This research paper looks at physical-digital spaces and is part of a series showcasing the intrinsic value of libraries. So it's really to help stimulate further insights and provide more evidence for you to use. And we know some of the library services with some of the previous reports use that with councils to generate more funding so they could refurbish some of their libraries. So please come along if you'd like a copy to stand 28. We've got plenty of those, and hopefully it's a value if you've not already seen that. Now I'd like to introduce today's keynote speakers. Pleasure to introduce Christine MacKenzie from the International Federation of Library Associations, the President-elect, and Allison Dobbie from the International Network of Library Innovators, the Oceania Chair. Now for Christine MacKenzie is a freelance librarian and most recently the Executive Officer of Public Libraries Victoria Network. She's had a long career in public libraries and retired as a CEO of Yarra Plenty Regional Library Service in January 2016 after 12 years in that role. As I said, she's currently President-elect of IFLA and on the Executive Committee member of the International Network of Library Innovators. Allison is currently the Principal Development Advisor for Community Services, Auckland Council, having worked in libraries in the local government, tertiary and government sectors for many years, and she's most recently led Auckland Libraries, a network of 55 libraries serving a population of 1.5 million in the Auckland region. Now the keynote is individually, we are at one drop, together we are an ocean, so I'm really looking forward to it. I recently read a beautiful book by Jeff Foster called The Deepest Acceptance, and he talks of a beautiful metaphor there around how we think we're an individual wave and not part of a greater ocean. So I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say, and thank you very much. I'm delighted to welcome them both to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Kia ora, bula, and thank you James and Civica for sponsoring this keynote address. When Allison and I were invited to speak this afternoon, we were delighted. Well, maybe at first a bit trepidatious, but then we were delighted to have a forum to spread the word about what's happening in the Pacific and to tell you how this has come about. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of which we are meeting for this APLIC conference and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So how this is going to work, Allison and I are going to share this next 50 minutes or so, or less than 50 minutes, 40 minutes, in what we are hoping to be a synchronised and seamless way. And we have also asked 3 of the INELI-Oceania innovators to join us later to share some of their experiences. To start this talk, we're going to explain why we chose to title our presentation Individually, we are one drop. Together, we are an ocean. This quote is attributed to the Japanese poet Ryanosuke Satora, and it was something that was picked up and amplified during the Pacific Libraries Summit that was held in Fiji on the 1st of June. We had played around with various ideas for the title of our presentation, but kept coming back to this one because it resonated with both of us. For me, the allegory of water is powerful. We live in the driest inhabited continent on Earth, and I grew up on a dairy farm which relied on good rainfall. And driving up last week on the Newell Highway through New South Wales, where 99% of the state is in drought, it really hit home. Everyone in Australia knows how important water is, every drop. Then we're in Fiji, surrounded by the beautiful ocean, but an ocean increasingly threatened by pollution and islands endangered by rising sea levels. Leneve Jamison, the program coordinator for INELI-Oceania, shared this story and it stuck with me. Leneve was talking with Rita from Kiribati during the convening. Leneve had done some research about the countries and people of the Pacific and remembered reading that Kiribati was only 70 metres above sea level and asked Rita if this was right. "Oh no," came the answer. "Our highest point is only 1 metre above sea level, and we can no longer visit the burial grounds of our ancestors. They are underwater." We learnt that the Kiribati government is encouraging their people to gain education and skills and are working on a policy of migrating with dignity and finding a place where the 100,000 people of Kiribati can live when their island is submerged by rising sea levels. As Ricky Baker so famously said in that great New Zealand film, Hunt for the Wilder People, shit just got real. I'll now pass to Allison so she can tell you what the title means for her and to talk about the history of INELI-Oceania.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Chris, and kia ora koutou. Good to see you all. From the apartment we're staying in here on the Gold Coast, I wake to the sparkle of the ocean. In Auckland, we celebrate the sparkle of the beautiful Waitemata Harbour as an icon. No one aspires to be a drop, a puddle, or a pond. We can be bigger than that. Yesterday, Lucy Bloom encouraged us all to search the same Google term repeatedly to cause "librarians are the secret masters of the world" to trend as top search for librarians. That's the power of many working to a common goal. But imagine if we turned our minds to something bigger that we wanted to change. As librarians, we are good at developing shared bibliographic systems which enable international resource sharing, but we are not nearly as good at sharing our energy as people. We are too proud or too modest. We try to go it alone and therefore lack impact. Yet we are a profession which is open to sharing, passionately committed to a shared vision, and we have strong collegial networks. Working together with shared purpose, we could make waves. We could be as powerful as an ocean. We could be the Pacific Ocean. We could roar like all those people in the stadium in Singapore. So, individually, we are but one drop. Together, we are an ocean. During this session, we want to explain some more about the significance of this saying in relation to libraries in the Pacific and to you and your role. Firstly, some brief background. INELI, the International Network of Emerging Library Innovators, was a program funded by the Gates Foundation Global Libraries Program to invest in the next generation of library leaders internationally. This program grew to over 120 people, 14 of whom were from Australia and New Zealand. We could see the potential for the South Pacific, so in 2013, Chris Christine, Joe McGill and I secured $500,000 from the Gates Foundation to bring the first regional version of INELI to Oceania. Our goals were, firstly, to identify and develop the talents of emerging library leaders across Australia, New Zealand and the South Pacific. Secondly, to build stronger linkages between key library associations and institutions across the Pacific region. And thirdly, to prove that a regional version of the global INELI program was workable. So since 2014 until its conclusion in June this year, 34 young leaders from 6 different Pacific countries have been nurtured through INELI-Oceania, supported by 6 mentors and 10 sponsors. The innovators included Māori and Aboriginal peoples, other Australians and New Zealanders, and people from Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, and Fiji. As a result of the INELI-Oceania program, they have all learned how to advocate, how to innovate, and how to lead change. The evaluations show that their self-awareness and self-confidence has increased markedly. Many have secured new roles and have become confident presenters at conferences, and a number are presenting here at APLIC, for example. Above all, they have become part of a strong network with strong friendships. The program has also generated its own momentums of ongoing network building, buddying, visits, learning initiated by the innovators themselves. The second goal, additional funding and support has been provided by 11 different agencies across the South Pacific, including the National Libraries of Australia and New Zealand, the State Libraries of Queensland and Victoria, the National and State Libraries of Australasia, the Public Libraries Victoria Network, National Archives of Fiji, Lianza and ALIA, as well as steering group members and everyone's employers. We started with 3 people. Now we are a strong regional network of at least 80 INELI-Oceania people. We have been a catalyst for strengthening of trans-Tasman and Pacific relationships and a number of joint initiatives, including strengthened connections between Lianza and ALIA. In terms of our third goal, we did prove the concept, and there are now 6 other regional INELI programs in sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, South America and Spain, the Balkans, India, and Southeast Asia. We were actively involved in supporting a number of these to get started. There are now also a growing number of national INELI programs as a further offshoot in countries such as Egypt, Turkey, and Indonesia. As a result, the INELI-Oceania networks extend globally across more than 500 people. During the program, we became increasingly aware of the extreme challenges faced by library colleagues from the Pacific Island nations, where lack of infrastructure and basic training and other leadership barriers made it difficult to even apply to be part of INELI-Oceania or to participate fully. Therefore, when we found that we had budget left over, we decided to try a different approach, and Chris is going to talk about that now.
So, we started thinking how we could create a lasting legacy for the INELI-Oceania program and extend the influence beyond those who have been part of the program. The impetus for applying for the grant from Global Libraries in the first place was to strengthen libraries in the South Pacific. Our first thoughts were modest, to have the final convening in Fiji rather than in Australia, where we had first planned to hold it. And then we started to think more boldly. And the idea of the Pacific Library Summit was born. The INELI-Oceania Steering Committee met in Melbourne in July 2017 and workshopped what this could look like. During that meeting, we articulated the primary purpose, which was to benefit... Looks like that hasn't quite worked. Yeah, no, sorry. That one. Then we started to think more boldly, and the idea of the Pacific Libraries Summit was born. The steering committee met in Melbourne in July 2017 and workshopped what this could look like. During that meeting, we articulated the primary purpose, which was to benefit and support public libraries in Pacific nations and address relevant United Nations Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which we identified as Goal 4, Quality Education, Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, and Goal 16, Peace, Justice and Strong Communities. We developed 4 objectives: create an opportunity for Pacific collaboration for and about public libraries, advocate the importance of public libraries in building sustainable communities, inspire, motivate and equip Pacific Library practitioners, and strengthen a supportive network of public library leaders and practitioners. We identified who should be there: practitioners, enablers and influencers from Australia, New Zealand, South and North Pacific Island countries, and we worked out what the week would look like. Not having a lot of luck here, it seems to be skipping one or something. Must be my technique, I think, I'm sorry. Maybe, Al, if you could try and find this slide. It's handy having a co-presenter standing up here too. So it was, thank you, that's the one. It was very exciting to arrive at Pacific Harbour in the last week of May for just 3 months ago and to see our planning become reality. No, that's not the one, it's the map we want.
What happens at the last minute?
Yes. We were there for a week. The first 2 days were the final convening for Cohort 2 of INELI-Oceania. Cohort 1 joined us during that time, and on the Wednesday there was a library tour of Suva Libraries. Thursday was the Advocacy Day and workshop, which was partially funded by IFLA through the International Advocacy Program, which enabled us to invite a number of practitioners from Pacific Island countries to discuss the UN 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals as they related to libraries. In the afternoon of that Thursday, the practitioner group developed a draft statement of intent to be presented to the wider audience of enablers and influencers who had been invited to the Library Summit Day. The 2 days, the Thursday and Friday, were a fine illustration of the forming, storming, norming and performing group dynamic process. The initial discussions were general and uncontroversial, but around lunchtime, people were starting to challenge the group, in particular, that we needed to move out of our comfort zone about which SDGs related to libraries, that we needed to acknowledge and address the Western European take on Indigenous knowledge systems, and what do we mean by the Pacific. These issues were raised respectfully and honestly, and also assertively. There was that bit in the middle where you start to think, oh God, this is all falling apart. And then the magic happens, and people started to really engage, contribute, and produce some great thinking. By the end of the afternoon of day one, we had a wall full of post-it notes that had been sorted into themes and a small group tasked with writing up the ideas into a statement of intent for presentation to the wider audience that had been invited to the summit on the Friday. We ended up with 8 goals and an agreed objective: to strengthen the impact of Pacific libraries to better support the needs of Pacific communities through collaborative networking and advocacy. The context of this is that we are the Pacific. We recognise the complexity of our region and its diverse interests. We recognise the contribution of all nations in the Pacific as equal partners. We recognise the value and contribution of the library field to the achievement of the SDGs. It is our time. I'll just go through fairly quickly the 8 goals, just so you have a sense of what we were talking about. We won't go through them too slowly, but the first goal, and this one was really interesting because it came up the top quite quickly and quite forcefully, and that was around developing national legislation and policy frameworks for libraries. In many of the Pacific countries, there is no Library Act, there's no framework for legal deposit requirements, and so really that was seen as one of the major things that needed to happen. And Goal 2, advocating for the role of libraries by supporting the United Nations 2030 Agenda. Slide 3, improve the literacy rates by providing early childhood programs and support for children and their families, providing safe spaces for people developing their literacy skills, giving access to a wide range of materials, including in local languages, and providing information and digital literacy training. Goal 4, preserve and promote cultural heritage by encouraging the practice and celebration of culture, languages and traditional knowledge systems, and creating and making available resources in Indigenous languages. Goal 5 is around promoting and strengthening collaboration. And Goal 6, building skills, capacities and recognition of the value of libraries by investing in the development of library leadership and improving access to library and information education programs across the Pacific. And those of you at Opeta's talk yesterday heard a bit about the history of the library and education programs in Fiji. Goal 7 is around ensuring equitable access to information to all. And Goal 8, developing inclusive programs and services that support awareness and delivery of SDGs. And this is where we were challenged because particularly in the Pacific, it's seen that Sustainable Development Goal 4 around education is the one that libraries need to concentrate on, and that's the only one they need to concentrate on. And we really were challenged to look at the goals around resilient communities, which is climate change and oceans, employment and gender equity. So all this was developed in an afternoon really, which was pretty amazing, and having been involved with the IFLA Global Vision project, there's nothing incongruous with that at all. So I guess it's a testament to our profession that we are pretty well all on the same page wherever we are. The Pacific Library Summit on the Friday, which now included influencers from governments, NGOs and community organisations, commenced with a Fijian traditional welcoming ceremony and was followed by keynote speeches and a panel discussion. The draft statement was presented to the group and the challenges and opportunities were discussed. The final part of the day involved people making personal commitments to the statement. The INELI-Oceania program has been extremely fortunate to have been very well supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Global Libraries, not just with funding, but also with the personal support of the director, Deborah Jacobs. Deborah has been vitally interested in the program since the beginning. She sees INELI as the most important program that Global Libraries has been involved in the Foundation's over 20 years and $1 billion investment in public libraries. Deborah attended the Fiji Summit and was so impressed by the outcomes achieved that Global Libraries has agreed to underwrite a further convening of the key players to work on a strategic action plan and a sustainability plan for the Pacific Libraries Network, and this will be held at the State Library of Queensland in September. A Pacific Libraries Network compact has been published that covers off the background, context, statement of intent, themes and commitments. It is designed to be the foundation document to move forward to strengthen libraries in the Pacific, to better support communities, and it's available on the INELI-Oceania Summit website. And so now I'll hand back to Allison to talk about the significance of the network.
So Chris has mentioned the Pacific Libraries Network. What is that and who is that? This is the beginning of the Pacific Libraries Network. The network is one of the outcomes of the summit, reflecting the desire and commitment of those present to continue to work together to achieve the goals that Chris has just outlined. None of those goals can be achieved by working alone. A collective response is required. So the intent of the Pacific Libraries Network is to be inclusive of all who are interested. Although the focus started with public libraries, it has broadened to include all. It is for all nations in the Pacific, the tiny northern states of Micronesia, the Melanesian nations of Western Pacific, the Polynesian nations of the Eastern Pacific, as well as Australia and New Zealand to the south, sometimes known in this context as Macronesia. The network recognises that Pacific peoples move and live across the whole Pacific, and that the needs of all Pacific communities matter. For example, that resources developed by Auckland Libraries for Cook Islands Language Week, or in the language of Kiribati for Auckland residents, can also be resources that are shared with those same communities in the wider Pacific. And why does this network matter? Pacific Island nations face complex challenges, as Chris has already outlined. They are among the most vulnerable nations in the world, already facing the impacts of climate change, sea level rise, and pollution of the oceans. They are tiny and isolated in terms of location, transport, and telecommunications, still dealing with post-colonial challenges, including loss of Indigenous languages and heritage, while now also grappling with new forms of economic and political influence from superpowers keen to exploit island resources. Yet the Pacific Island nations are unique and have an important voice that needs to be heard. They bring important perspectives to contribute to global thinking, and they are taking leadership roles on some of these issues in global fora, for example, the future of our oceans. They have seized on the Sustainable Development Goals as a strong planning platform to help move forward. In the midst of all these challenges, it is very hard for libraries to compete for attention or funding. Therefore, libraries tend to be poorly funded, there is no professional recognition, and career planning is uncertain. The number of librarians in each country is small, and library associations struggle to survive. The greatest needs are leadership development, capacity building, professional recognition, and advocacy, gaining a voice, not container loads of old books from well-meaning neighbours. In spite of all these challenges, libraries and archives in the Pacific are doing amazing things for their communities. You saw some of this yesterday in Opeta's presentation about taking archives to their communities, truly groundbreaking approaches. And we've all been blown away by the innovative ideas for service delivery, such as the Sunday Book Club in Suva, the Book Belong Pikanini program in Papua New Guinea, which is exceptional in reaching isolated communities. Amazed by the sheer resilience and determination and the strategic approach. For example, the National Strategy for Library Development adopted by the government of Papua New Guinea. How many other nations can claim that achievement? And huge congratulations to Papua New Guinea for bringing so many delegates here to this conference. During the forum and hearing these stories, the stakeholders from education, culture, and development backgrounds began to realise just how much libraries could contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, not just directly through reading and learning, but also indirectly as providers of information and as places for discussion and debate and sharing of knowledge about these topics. Their eyes were opened. They realised they could be more effective by working through and with libraries, and that libraries have to be at the table, part of the wider development conversation. So establishment of the Pacific Libraries Network matters immensely as a vital next step to seize and shape this momentum, to be ready to be at the table, to be able to roar with one voice by working collaboratively, by sharing what we are able to share as equal partners. There is a real sense of readiness for this next step. The time for Pacific Libraries is here. There were extraordinary moments during the 2 days of the Advocacy Day and Summit. We talked, we sang, we cried, we debated, we sat in awe, we learned, and we were inspired. We committed to stay connected and to act. So I'd like to invite 3 of our INELI-Oceania innovators to the stage to share their reflections on this, please. We have Nina Nakaora, Pamela McGowan, Nina from Suva Libraries, Pamela McGowan from Townsville Libraries, Ania Biazik from Auckland Libraries. Please come and share your stories.
I love the diversity of the Pacific Library Summit. It was a gathering of people who cared deeply about their community. I was part of the Vox Pop team, and I observed the sheer happiness and hope for many of the participants to be included in the development of the Statement of Intent. A Pacific problem needed a Pacific solution, and as was said from one of the discussion groups, it was our time. As library practitioners, we share common values and challenges. And one of our challenges for many Pacific libraries is getting policymakers, stakeholders, and members of the community to appreciate that libraries provide access to information and cultural knowledge. And we have never been able to influence them successfully because we've always worked in isolation. So the summit provided a platform to share and listen to inspiring stories on how libraries, committed individuals, and organizations were making a big positive impact in the communities they served. We all wanted our communities to thrive and are aware that with our limited resources, we need support in terms of resources and know-how. So the summit gave us the opportunity to learn from each other and gain a better understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals and how we need to align our services and programs with the Sustainable Development Goals to ensure that no one gets left behind.
Kia ora. My name is Ania Biazik. I work in Auckland Libraries. We would like to welcome you with the welcome of Cook Island Language Week. Kia ora. For me, the most extraordinary moments at the Pacific Libraries Summit were hearing and seeing passionate people from the Pacific willing to speak up about their hopes, aspirations for their nations. Just like Nina, I was in the group involved with filming the Vox Pop series, and participants were invited to share their thoughts and impression of the summit on the camera. And this activity proved to be very successful, and we've gathered over 50 testimonials. Neaki Latia, the Director of Education at the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport in Tuvalu, said, "The summit encouraged me to make sure that the school libraries are utilized to their full potential, that they are well equipped, that the teachers librarians are trained to deliver the best service to the children of Tuvalu, a nation of 11,000 people." Another person, university librarian at the National University of Samoa, Avalongo Nanaitogi Manu Aifai Tunupopo, he said, "Today, I've seen the success and unity in action. As a group of many Pacific nations and islands, we are overwhelmed by our newfound network and mutual support, providing a platform to be a stronger association and begin advocating for successful and effective libraries in the future." My reflection was that these leaders understood the power of the summit. They articulated their community's needs, aspirations, and their will to work together to address issues related to the Pacific, and doing so as equal partners. And one significant moment that I clearly remember, while we were workshopping the United Nations Sustainable Goals, we were reminded that we should not be blinded by one dimension of the information sector. It is so easy to focus just on one of the goals, number 4, about quality education. Isn't it that we care all about? But what stood out for me was one moment when one brave woman, a young woman, who said that all the goals are relevant to the Pacific, but for her, it was the goal number 13 and 14, the climate action and life below water. The group of 4 goals, initially ignored, become part of the discussion. Goal number 12, responsible consumption and production, number 13, climate change, 14, life below water, and 15, life on land. And this twist in the conversation made an impact in the debate that followed. My reflection is that this debate really reinforced the message that the Pacific people are the leaders and the subject matter experts when it comes to the Pacific. It's time to make their voices heard. Thank you.
Hi everyone, before I begin today, I'd like to thank the INELI-Oceania group for sponsoring me to attend APLIC 2018. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. When I think about the 2 days at Pacific Harbour, there's so much to talk about, and there's a few things that really do stand out. When we looked at the statement of intent, there was a statement at the very start, and the last word of the sentence was advocacy. And I remember quite clearly that when we were talking about that sentence to make sure what do we want this statement of intent to be about, advocacy wasn't included to begin with. And there was a real sense in the room that advocacy, this tool, this statement of intent is a live document. It's our hopes, it's our aspirations for what we want for the Pacific region. So by using the word advocacy, we were making the statement that we want to make sure that libraries and library staff do roar in these areas, that we don't hide our light under a bush, or that we share with each other and with the world the great work that libraries are doing to make the world a better place and to achieve sustainable development goals. The other thing that was really interesting was the discussion around We the Pacific, and I'm going to read out the context again for you. We recognise the complexity of our region and its diverse interests. We recognise the contribution of all countries in the Pacific as equal partners, and we recognise the value and contributions of the library fields to the achievement of SDGs. It is our time. It was really interesting that someone was bold enough to ask the question, are Australia and New Zealand part of the Pacific? And I think it was a really important question to ask, because often it can be seen that the bigger countries have their own agenda, and the Pacific has so many different countries, so many complexities. But I think the statement, We the Pacific, makes sure that no matter whether you're part of Macronesia or Micronesia, as it was described, we all have a place in the Pacific, and that we all have our goals, hopes and dreams, and that we can work collaboratively to achieve those through libraries. The whole conference itself was just a democratic process of openness, working through disagreements about how things were worded, and people were bold and brave in sharing that, and there was a real sense of respect and openness in it, and it's something that I haven't seen in many professions before, where people are so willing to kind of fight for what they believe for, and for these things to be worked out collaboratively. And the best part for me that still sticks with me is at the end of the whole summit, each person stood up and said aloud a commitment that they would make, that they could personally do themselves to make sure that the statement of intent could be achieved. I made a pledge on that day to become an ALIA member because I was not one previously, and I'm ashamed to say that I didn't realise the impact that ALIA and other national library associations are having in supporting Pacific nations. And so if you aren't a member and you're thinking, what happens with this money? This is one of the things that does happen. I can't encourage you highly enough to be part of something greater, and that's one way that you can do that. I'm sure Chris will talk more about the pledge that she made and how it went along with that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and just showing the extraordinary leadership that's emerging from INELI-Oceania innovators as well. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Nina, Anya, Pamela. Thank you. The most extraordinary moment for me was the one that Pamela also shared about the definition of the Pacific. Like, what do we mean when we say Pacific? And so I had gone to Fiji assuming that it would be the island nations of the Pacific deciding their priorities, while those of us from Australia and New Zealand kind of sat on the sideline and listened and figured out how we could step in to assist. But very politely, the inherent colonialism in my assumption was pointed out and shown to be flawed. And after a fantastic debate, which was really thoughtful and soul-searching and from a position of absolute respect, came the moment when the Pacific Island participants themselves agreed that we are all the Pacific, all equal partners, as Pamela said, contributing what we can to support our common aspiration. Our facilitators and OPETA have since told us that in other similar meetings for other disciplines, this debate usually comes later and can be very contentious, taking a long time, i.e. months, to resolve. We did it during the afternoon of day one because we had already built a sense of trust in each other and already had that strong desire to be an ocean. So thereafter, when one of the participants said, Pacific Libraries, this is our time, we knew it was about all of us, that it was our time, that we were all welcome and all in this together. Chris, tell us about your moment.
Thanks, Al. My most extraordinary moment was the closure of the summit, and as Pamela was saying, the commitment of every person there to achieve the statement of intent and the 8 goals. It was the end of an incredible week, a week of fellowship, great goodwill, excitement, friendship and collegiality. There was a real sense of achievement and optimism. And every person in the room, around 100 people, stood and made a personal commitment to action. These actions ranged from Pamela joining ALIA to sharing resources, arranging to get on the agenda of future meetings of the Pacific Culture, Education and Women forums, working with Fiji Archives to digitise the Fiji Times, going back to their own library association to work on the SDGs, reactivating library associations, investigating work placements for staff from the Pacific Islands, and highlighting the SDGs at local workplaces. And Pamela mentioned mine. I said that I would raise money to have the 5 Pacific Library Associations there that weren't already members, to raise money to enable them to join IFLA for a year. And I did my first crowdsourcing, and it was fantastically successful, and it was really wonderful. We raised nearly $2,000 in 7 days for that purpose, and so now we have 5 new members of IFLA, hopefully very motivated to continue their work. After this, we asked everyone to sign their name to the statement of intent. It was actually a piece of paper, and we provided blank pieces of paper for everyone to sign, and that original is now lodged at the National Archives of Fiji. And finally, after all this, there was one last thing. The Fijian participants and staff from the Pearl Resort all sang ISLA, the Fijian farewell love song. I'm not particularly prone to tears, except when the dog dies in the movies, but I felt quite emotional and incredibly moved that this journey had come to an end and all our hopes and aspirations for the week had been well and truly exceeded. It was a very special moment. I only wish we had a video of the song to share with you. It doesn't seem quite right that the chicken dance from the IFLA Global Vision Workshop in Hanoi is preserved for posterity, and this isn't. Thanks, Anna. So now back to Alison to conclude this presentation and tell you how we can turn all these individual drops into an ocean.
So now we are sharing this outcome and the move to establish a Pacific Libraries network with all of you, because those of us from Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific Islands are all of the Pacific. Our convening in Brisbane in September with some key people is a way of making this sustainable and achieving those goals and creating a strong foundation. The potential of libraries in the Pacific matters. Our ability to roar with one voice, to be an ocean, can be a catalyst for learning, literacy, knowledge, democracy, civic participation, equity, cultural identity, and sustainable development. If you care about libraries in the Pacific, please join us. If you have strengths and resources to offer and want to be involved, please let us know. If you want to become part of this ocean, welcome. Kia ora.
Beautiful. I think that's the... have we got any questions from the audience? We've got a few minutes before we finish the session and we get ready for the conference dinner and some dancing, hopefully. Any questions?
Sorry, we kind of assume people know. The Sustainable Development Goals for the United Nations 2030 Agenda. So in 2015, all 193 member states of the United Nations signed the United Nations 2030 Agenda, No One Left Behind. And there's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I forget how many targets, something like 197, I think. And IFLA has started work, and ALIA has done a fantastic job of really promoting the role of libraries for governments who report on these goals, to incorporate what libraries are doing to show how libraries are helping countries achieve the agendas that they've set out to do. So thank you for the question. Yeah, well, thanks, Clem. We did have someone from DFAT in Fiji. We're hoping that she'll be able to attend the next meeting in September. And I know that Sue McKerricker from ALIA has very good connections too. So we're aware of the connections we need to make. It's just a matter of getting in there. And but we did have someone from DFAT there.
Also someone from the New Zealand Embassy in Fiji, and we're still working hard to get people from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in New Zealand to come along, because what we're saying to them is that now that we have goals and priorities for development of libraries in the Pacific, it's much more helpful to those agencies to know where they can invest their development funds to align with that, rather than investing on an ad hoc basis, as has been so often the case in the past. So that's a key message we're trying to get into those agencies, that this is helpful for their development investment. So anything that you can do which gets that message into development agencies is welcomed. Thank you.
And just picking up on something Dave Snowden said this morning, apparently the latest description is Indo-Pacific. And we tried looking up we Googled Indo-Pacific, but it wasn't terribly clear what it meant. But you're hearing the Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, talks about it, the Indo-Pacific, as does Mr. Pompeo from the USA. So.
within New Zealand, but also in the realm of New Zealand countries, which is Palau, Cook Island, and Niue. Because these islands, if you're not aware, are New Zealand crown countries. And they had very similar issues and challenges to our other Pacific islands. And as one of our academics and scholars say, we are in a sea of islands, and the sea and the ocean connects us. So whether we're Pacific people are in New Zealand, they're still connected to their families and their whānau in the islands, and vice versa. And there's a whole lot of traveling and transnationalism going on. So I just could you talk about a little bit about how these goals translate or applicable to the other Pacific, like the Pacific Brown countries, New Zealand Brown countries, and also in terms of because their languages are endangered. They're in the United Nations endangered list, and those three countries as well as the others, but they are the most endangered in terms of their languages and cultures, and applicability of also these goals into bringing them on board, and around training and development to make that more accessible, because we've got the technology, you can do it by distance and stuff like that. I know USP has got a program, but, to offer other options too. Thank you.
Our invitations to the summit in Fiji went to all nations in the Pacific, whether they were part of New Zealand government or other governments. We are trying to include all nations in their own right. And we are in conversation with Jonathan at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, who is the kind of the commissioner or whatever for some of those islands, to help him realise the importance of this work and for people from those islands to get involved. And so we were disappointed that in the end we didn't have anybody able to attend from Tokelau or Niue or Nauru, some of those other smaller places, but that doesn't mean that we stopped trying. The answers to some of the other questions that you ask are what we hope the outcome of the convening in Brisbane will be, which is really an action plan to bring those goals to life, and what specifically are we going to be doing as a priority to achieve those goals, and how and who with. So hopefully there'll be answers to that once we've concluded that. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll bring that to a close, and I'll just give everyone a round of applause, please, for Christine and Alison and the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.